The dust had barely settled from the wagon wheels when Georgia Sullivan realized her brother-in-law had actually done it. He had left her standing alone in the middle of nowhere with nothing but the merciless California sun beating down on her head and miles of empty desert stretching in every direction. She stood there for a long moment, her navy traveling dress already clinging to her skin with perspiration, watching the distant shape of Marcus's wagon disappear over the ridge toward Red Bluff. Her sister's husband had smiled that cold smile of his when he suggested she walk the rest of the way, saying something about teaching her a lesson in gratitude. The argument they'd had that morning about his treatment of her sister had clearly festered in his mind all day, and now Georgia was paying the price for speaking her conscience. It was August of 1878, and the California heat was unforgiving at this time of day. Georgia shielded her eyes and looked around, trying to get her bearings. She had been visiting her sister Eleanor in Red Bluff for 3 weeks, and Marcus had insisted on driving her to catch the stage in the next town over. Except now she was stranded somewhere between Red Bluff and nowhere, with no water, no supplies, and no real idea which direction would lead her to safety. She took a deep breath and started walking, following the rutted wagon tracks that stretched ahead of her. Her boots were meant for city streets, not this rocky terrain, and within minutes she could feel blisters forming. The sun climbed higher, and she wished desperately for a hat or parasol, anything to shield her face from the relentless glare. An hour passed, maybe 2. Georgia's throat felt like sandpaper, and her legs trembled with every step. The landscape around her was nothing but sagebrush and rocky outcroppings, with distant mountains shimmering in the heat haze. She had seen no other travelers, no signs of life except the occasional lizard skittering across the path. When she finally stumbled and fell to her knees, Georgia wasn't sure she had the strength to get back up. The world spun around her, and she pressed her palms against the hot earth, trying to steady herself. This was how people died out here, she realized with a cold sense of clarity, alone, forgotten, left to the elements by people who should have protected them. She heard the hoofbeats before she saw the rider. At first she thought it might be a mirage, some cruel trick of her overheated mind. But the sound grew louder, and when she lifted her head, squinting against the glare, she saw a horse and rider approaching at a steady canter. The man pulled his horse to a stop a few yards away, and Georgia found herself looking up at a cowboy who sat tall in his saddle, his face shadowed by a worn hat. He swung down from his horse in one fluid motion and knelt beside her, and she got her first clear look at his face. He was probably in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of whiskey that showed genuine concern. "Madam, what in God's name are you doing out here alone?" His voice was deep and held a slight drawl that spoke of time spent in the Southwest. Georgia tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She managed only a croak. The cowboy, she could see now that he wore practical range clothes, dusty chaps over worn denim, and a gun belt that looked well used, immediately reached for the canteen hanging from his saddle. He uncapped it and held it to her lips, tilting it gently so she could drink without choking. The water was warm, but tasted better than anything she had ever experienced. She drank greedily, and he pulled it back after a moment. "Easy now. Too much at once will make you sick." After another moment, he let her drink again. This time Georgia had the presence of mind to take smaller sips. When she finally pushed the canteen away, some clarity had returned to her vision. "Thank you," she managed, her voice raspy but functional. "I thought I was going to die out here." His expression darkened. "You nearly did. This is no place for anyone to be wandering alone, especially not a lady in city clothes." He studied her face, which she knew must be flushed red from the sun. "Where did you come from? Where's your wagon, your horse?" Shame flooded through Georgia, mixing with her lingering anger at Marcus. "My brother-in-law left me here. We had an argument, and he decided I could walk the rest of the way back to Red Bluff." The cowboy's jaw tightened, and something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "He what?" "I know how it sounds." Georgia looked down at her dusty dress, at her scraped and bleeding hands. But it's the truth. His name is Marcus Sullivan, and he's married to my sister Eleanor. I was staying with them, and I was supposed to catch the stage today to head back to San Francisco, but he left me stranded. The cowboy was quiet for a long moment, and Georgia could almost see him working through the implications of what she had told him. Finally, he shook his head and offered her his hand. "Well, madam, we need to get you out of this sun and back to civilization. Can you stand?" With his help, Georgia managed to get to her feet, though her legs felt as stable as water. The cowboy kept one hand on her elbow, steadying her, and she was grateful for his solid presence. "My name is Preston Vance," he said, guiding her toward his horse. "I work on the Double Creek Ranch about 5 miles north of Red Bluff. I was heading into town when I spotted you." "Georgia Sullivan," she replied. "Well, Georgia Sawyer. Sullivan is my married name, though I'm widowed." Something shifted in Preston's expression at that information, though he simply nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Sawyer. Now let's get you on my horse. It's going to be a tight fit with both of us, but she's a strong mare and can handle it." His horse was indeed a beautiful animal, a bay mare with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. Preston swung up into the saddle first, then reached down for Georgia. She placed her foot in the stirrup, and his hand closed around hers, strong and sure, as he pulled her up behind him. For a moment, Georgia hesitated, suddenly aware of how intimate this position was. She would have to put her arms around him, press close to his back. But the alternative was staying out in this desert, and that was unthinkable. She wrapped her arms around his waist, and Preston glanced back at her. "Hold on tight, madam. We're going to take it slow so you don't fall, but I want to get you back to Red Bluff before sundown." As the mare started moving, Georgia rested her cheek against Preston's back, feeling the warmth of him through his shirt. He smelled of leather and horse and something else, something clean like soap and sage. Despite everything that had happened, despite her exhaustion and fear, she felt safe for the first time since Marcus had driven away. "How far did he take you from town?" Preston asked as they rode. Georgia tried to remember. "We left this morning, probably around 9 o'clock. We were heading towards Sacramento. I think we had been traveling for maybe 3 hours when we stopped, supposedly to water the horses. That's when he told me to get down, and then he just drove off." Preston's back tensed beneath her cheek. 3 hours? You walked back for how long?" "I'm not sure. 2 hours, maybe more?" "You're lucky I came along when I did." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "Another hour, and you would have been in serious trouble. This heat can kill someone faster than most people realize." They rode in silence for a while, and Georgia found herself studying the landscape with new eyes. It looked different from the back of Preston's horse, less threatening. She could see the beauty in the rolling hills, the way the afternoon light painted the rocks in shades of gold and amber. "What brought you out this way?" she asked, partly to distract herself from how aware she was of every movement of his body. "Delivery to the Hendricks place," Preston said. "One of their ranch hands was injured last week, and I was bringing over some of my mother's salve. She has a gift for healing remedies." "Your mother lives on the Double Creek Ranch?" "Born and raised there. My father started the ranch back in '63 after he mustered out of the Army. My mother came west with a wagon train in '65, and they met at a barn dance in Red Bluff." There was warmth in his voice when he spoke of them. "They have 4 sons. I'm the second eldest." Georgia smiled despite her exhaustion. "That sounds like a good life." "It has its moments." Preston adjusted his grip on the reins. "What about you? You said you're from San Francisco?" "I moved there 3 years ago after my husband died. He was a banker in Sacramento, but I wanted a fresh start somewhere new. My sister Eleanor moved to Red Bluff with Marcus about 5 years ago. I came to visit because she wrote saying she missed me." "And now?" Georgia's smile faded. "Now I'm not sure what to think. Marcus has never been warm toward me, but I never imagined he would do something like this. I'm worried about Eleanor. If he would treat me this way, his wife's sister, what might he do to her?" Preston didn't answer right away, and when he did, his words were careful. "That's a serious concern. Has your sister said anything about how he treats her?" "Not in so many words, but I've seen things these past few weeks. The way she flinches when he raises his voice, how she's always trying to anticipate his moods, keep him happy. This morning I confronted him about it, told him he had no right to speak to her the way he does. That's what started the argument. So he punished you for defending your sister. Exactly. Preston was quiet for another long moment. When we get to Red Bluff, we should find the sheriff. What Marcus did isn't just cruel, it's criminal. He endangered your life. The thought of involving the law made Georgia's stomach clench with anxiety. I don't know if that's a good idea. Eleanor still has to live with him. If I press charges, it might make things worse for her. Or it might make him think twice before he hurts anyone else. Preston glanced back at her. But that's your decision to make, Mrs. Sawyer. I'll support whatever you choose to do. His words, spoken with such simple sincerity, touched something in Georgia's heart. She tightened her arms slightly around his waist. Thank you, Mr. Vance, for everything. I don't know how I can ever repay your kindness. You don't need to repay anything. Out here we help each other. That's just how it works. They rode on as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon. Georgia's body ached from the heat and exertion, but she felt increasingly alert, aware of every detail of this moment, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, the breadth of Preston's shoulders, the way he handled the reins with casual competence, completely at ease in this harsh landscape that had nearly killed her. "Can I ask you something?" Georgia said after a while. "Of course." "Why were you out here alone? Don't cowboys usually travel in groups?" Preston chuckled, and she felt it rumble through his chest. "Sometimes. But I'm comfortable on my own, and like I said, I was just making a quick delivery. Besides, I know this territory like the back of my hand. I've been riding these trails since I was a boy." "How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?" 26 this past spring. You?" 24. I'll be 25 in October. Georgia paused. "I was married at 18, widowed at 21. Sometimes it feels like I've lived two entirely different lives." "I'm sorry you lost your husband so young." Georgia considered how to respond. The truth was complicated. Thomas had been a good man, kind and steady, but she had never felt the kind of passion for him that she had read about in books. Theirs had been a practical match, arranged by their families. And while she had cared for him, his death had left her more adrift than heartbroken. "Thank you," she said simply. It was a long time ago now. As they rode, the landscape gradually began to change. The barren desert gave way to scattered trees and patches of grassland. Georgia could see cattle in the distance, grazing peacefully, and she knew they must be approaching inhabited land. "We'll be in Red Bluff within the hour," Preston said. "Do you want me to take you directly to your sister's house, or would you prefer to go somewhere else first?" Georgia thought about seeing Marcus again, about the confrontation that would inevitably follow. She wasn't ready for that, not yet. "Is there a hotel in town?" "The Red Bluff Inn. It's clean and respectable, run by a widow named Mrs. Chen. I can take you there first if you'd like." "Yes, please." The relief that flooded through Georgia was palpable. "I need some time to think about what to do next." "That's understandable." Preston's voice was gentle. "And Mrs. Sawyer, when you do decide what to do, if you need any help, you just let me know. What Marcus did to you wasn't right, and I mean to make sure you're safe and taken care of." There was something in his tone that made Georgia's heart skip not just kindness, but something deeper, something personal. She told herself she was imagining it, that Preston was simply being a gentleman, but she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest at his words. The sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink when they finally rode into Red Bluff. It was a typical frontier town, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church, and various other establishments. People were going about their evening business, and several looked up with curiosity as Preston rode past with Georgia behind him. He guided the mare to a stop in front of a 2-story building with a painted sign that read Red Bluff Inn in neat letters. Preston dismounted first, then reached up to help Georgia down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her, his hands firm on her waist. "Easy," he murmured. You've been through a lot today." They stood there for a moment, closer than propriety probably demanded, and Georgia found herself looking up into his eyes. In the golden light of sunset, they seemed to hold depths she hadn't noticed before. There was strength there, yes, but also kindness and intelligence, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Mr. Vance," she began. "Preston," he interrupted softly. "Please call me Preston." Preston? His name felt right on her tongue. "I truly cannot thank you enough." "You already have." He stepped back, breaking the spell of the moment, and offered her his arm. "Let's get you settled." The interior of the Red Bluff Inn was cool and clean, with simple but comfortable furnishings. A small Chinese woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from the front desk as they entered, and her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Georgia's disheveled appearance. "Mr. Vance," she said with a slight accent. "What has happened?" "Mrs. Chen, this is Mrs. Georgia Sawyer. She's had a difficult day and needs a room for the night, maybe longer." Mrs. Chen came around the desk, her expression shifting to one of concern. Of course. "Come, dear, you look exhausted. I have a lovely room on the second floor, quiet and private." "Thank you," Georgia said. "I'm afraid I don't have my belongings with me. They're still at my sister's house." "We will manage." Mrs. Chen waved a dismissive hand. "I have a few things you can borrow for tonight. Tomorrow we sort everything out." As Mrs. Chen led Georgia toward the stairs, Preston called out, "Mrs. Sawyer?" Georgia turned back to look at him. "I'll come by tomorrow morning to check on you if that's all right. Make sure you're doing better." Something in Georgia's chest tightened at the thought of seeing him again. "I would like that very much." Preston smiled, and it transformed his whole face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. "Then I'll see you tomorrow. Get some rest." After he left, Mrs. Chen showed Georgia to a small but immaculate room with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. There was a pitcher of water in a basin, and Mrs. Chen promised to bring up some supper and a nightgown Georgia could borrow. Alone finally, Georgia sank onto the bed and let the events of the day wash over her. She had nearly died in the desert. Marcus had deliberately abandoned her, left her to perish. And Preston Vance, a stranger, had saved her life, without hesitation or expectation of reward. She got up and moved to the window, looking out at the street below. Somewhere in this town, Eleanor was probably wondering what had happened to her. Georgia knew she would have to face her sister soon, would have to tell her the truth about Marcus. But tonight she was too exhausted to deal with any of it. Mrs. Chen returned with a tray of food beef stew and fresh bread and a simple cotton nightgown. After the older woman left, Georgia forced herself to eat, though her stomach was still unsettled. She washed as best she could with the basin and water, wincing at her sunburned face and the blisters on her feet. Her hands were scratched and scraped, her dress was ruined, and she knew she would feel the effects of this day for a while to come. But she was alive. Thanks to Preston, she was alive. Georgia changed into the borrowed nightgown and crawled into bed, expecting to fall asleep immediately. Instead, she found herself staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every moment of her time with Preston. The way he had knelt beside her in the desert, the gentleness with which he had given her water, the protective anger in his voice when she told him what Marcus had done, the solid warmth of his back as she rode behind him, his easy competence, his kindness. She had been married once, had thought she understood what it meant to be drawn to a man. But what she felt when she thought about Preston was different from anything she had experienced with Thomas. It was sharper, more intense, like standing too close to a fire. It was probably just gratitude, she told herself. He had saved her life. Of course, she felt drawn to him. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, the last image in her mind was Preston's smile and the way his eyes had held hers in the golden light of evening. Morning came with bright sunlight streaming through the window. Georgia woke slowly, disoriented at first before the memories of the previous day came flooding back. Her body ached in a dozen places, And when she looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she saw that her face was bright red from sunburn. Mrs. Chen knocked softly and entered with a breakfast tray and an armful of clothes. "Good morning, dear. I brought you something to wear. These belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Sacramento. They should fit you well enough." The dress was simpler than Georgia's usual attire, a practical cotton print in shades of blue, but it was clean and looked comfortable. There were also undergarments, stockings, and even a pair of sturdy shoes. "Mrs. Chen, you're too kind. I'll pay you back for all of this." "Nonsense. You help others when you can, and they help you. That is how we survive out here." Mrs. Chen set the tray down and studied Georgia's sunburned face with a critical eye. "I have a salve that will help with that burn. I will bring it up after you eat." After Mrs. Chen left, Georgia ate the simple breakfast of eggs, toast, and coffee, feeling strength return to her body with each bite. She dressed carefully, trying not to aggravate her blisters and scrapes, and had just finished pinning up her dark hair when there was another knock at the door. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Chen with the promised salve. Instead, Preston Vance stepped into the room holding his hat in his hands. He had cleaned up since yesterday, wearing a fresh shirt and looking somehow even more handsome in the morning light. "Mrs. Sawyer," he said, then paused, his eyes sweeping over her as if checking for injuries. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Sore and sunburned, but alive. Thanks to you." Georgia gestured to the room's single chair. "Please, sit down." Preston sat, though he looked a bit uncomfortable in the small feminine space. Georgia perched on the edge of the bed, suddenly very aware that they were alone together in her room, which was not at all proper. But after everything that had happened, propriety seemed less important than it once had. "I've been thinking about your situation," Preston said. "About your sister and Marcus." "So have I. I barely slept last night worrying about it. Have you decided what you want to do?" Georgia twisted her hands in her lap. "I need to see Eleanor, make sure she's all right, but I'm afraid of what Marcus might have told her. He could have said anything that I ran off, that I was ungrateful, that I caused trouble." "Then we go together," Preston said firmly. "I'll take you to see your sister, and I'll make sure Marcus understands that what he did was unacceptable. I don't want to put you in the middle of family business. You're not putting me anywhere. I'm choosing to help." Preston leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "Mrs. Sawyer, what Marcus did to you was attempted murder, plain and simple. If it had been any other woman, if I hadn't happened along when I did, you would have died out there. That's not a family squabble, that's a crime." The blunt assessment made Georgia's breath catch. She had been trying not to think about it in those terms, but Preston was right. Marcus had tried to kill her. "Then what do you suggest?" "We talk to your sister first, see if she's safe, if she wants help. Then we go to Sheriff Davis and file a report. Let the law handle Marcus." Georgia nodded slowly. It made sense, even if the thought of all that confrontation made her stomach churn. "All right, when should we go?" "Whenever you're ready. I already let my foreman know I'd be in town today helping a friend." The word friend made something warm bloom in Georgia's chest. "Give me a few more minutes to prepare myself." Preston stood, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll wait downstairs. Take your time." After he left, Georgia took a moment to steady herself. She smoothed down the borrowed dress, checked her reflection one more time, and tried to mentally prepare for seeing Eleanor and Marcus again. Then she made her way downstairs where Preston was waiting by the front desk, talking quietly with Mrs. Chen. "Ready?" he asked when he saw her. "As I'll ever be." They stepped out into the morning sunshine, and Preston offered her his arm. Georgia took it, grateful for his steady presence. Red Bluff was already bustling with activity, people going in and out of shops, wagons rolling down the street, children playing in the dusty alleys between buildings. "Your sister's house is on the east side of town, right?" Preston asked. "Yes, the white house with blue shutters near the church." They walked in comfortable silence, and Georgia found herself noticing little details about Preston. The way he nodded respectfully to everyone they passed, how people seemed to know and like him, the protective way he guided her around obstacles in the road. He was clearly well regarded in this community, A man people trusted. The walk to Eleanor's house took only about 10 minutes, but to Georgia it felt both too long and too short. Her heart was pounding by the time they reached the white picket fence that surrounded the small yard. The house looked peaceful in the morning light, giving no hint of the turmoil within. Preston squeezed her arm gently. "I'm right here with you." Georgia nodded and pushed open the gate. They walked up to the front door together and she knocked, her hand trembling slightly. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door swung open and Eleanor stood there, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. She was a few years older than Georgia, with the same dark hair and similar features, though her face was drawn and pale. "Georgia," Eleanor gasped. "Oh my God, Georgia, I thought Marcus said—" She broke off, tears streaming down her face, and pulled Georgia into a fierce embrace. Over Eleanor's shoulder, Georgia could see into the house. Marcus was standing in the parlor, his expression shifting rapidly from surprise to anger to something that might have been fear. "Eleanor," Georgia said gently, pulling back to look at her sister, "we need to talk. Can we come in?" Eleanor nodded, then seemed to notice Preston for the first time. "Who's this?" "This is Preston Vance. He saved my life yesterday after Marcus left me in the desert." Eleanor's face went white. She turned to look at her husband, and Marcus took a step back, his hands raised defensively. "Now, Eleanor, let me explain." "Explain?" Eleanor's voice was shrill. "You told me she got out of the wagon and ran off. You said she was hysterical and you couldn't find her." "She was being difficult," Marcus said, his jaw tightening. "She needed to learn some respect." Preston moved past Georgia into the house, and suddenly he seemed larger, more imposing. "You left a woman alone in the desert with no water, no horse, no supplies. You nearly killed her. That's not teaching respect, that's attempted murder." Marcus's face flushed red. "This is family business. You need to leave." "I'm not going anywhere. Mrs. Sawyer here is my concern now, and I'm making sure she and her sister are safe." The two men faced each other, tension crackling in the air. Georgia quickly moved to Eleanor's side, taking her sister's hand. Eleanor was shaking, tears still streaming down her face. "Eleanor," Georgia said quietly, "has he hurt you? Tell me the truth." Eleanor's silence was answer enough. Then, so quietly Georgia almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "Yes." The single word seemed to drain all the fight out of the room. Marcus's shoulders sagged, and Preston's expression hardened into something dangerous. "Pack your things," Georgia said to her sister. "You're coming with me to the hotel. You don't have to stay here." "She's my wife," Marcus said, but there was no force behind the words. He knew he had lost. "She's a person," Preston said coldly, "and she has every right to leave if she wants to." Eleanor looked between her husband and her sister, and Georgia could see the war playing out on her face, fear, loyalty, habit, all battling against the desire to escape. Finally, she nodded. "I'll pack a bag." Marcus made no move to stop her as she climbed the stairs. He just stood there, looking deflated and pathetic. Georgia felt no sympathy for him. "You tried to kill me," she said, her voice steady despite the anger churning in her gut. "You left me to die in the desert because I had the nerve to defend my sister. What kind of man does that?" "I didn't think," Marcus began. "Exactly. You didn't think. You didn't care." Georgia took a step toward him. "If Preston hadn't found me, I would be dead right now. And you would have told Eleanor I ran away and no one would have known the truth." Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. Preston moved to stand beside Georgia, a silent show of support. Eleanor came back down the stairs carrying a small carpet bag. Her hands were still shaking, but there was determination in her eyes now. "I'm leaving, Marcus. I don't know if it's forever, but I need time away from you. Time to think." "Eleanor, please." "No." Eleanor's voice was firmer now. "You hurt my sister. You've been hurting me for months. I can't do this anymore." Georgia put her arm around Eleanor's shoulders, and together the two sisters walked out of the house. Preston followed, keeping himself between them and Marcus. They didn't look back. The walk back to the Red Bluff Inn was quiet. Eleanor cried silently, leaning against Georgia, and Preston walked a few steps ahead, giving them space while still staying close enough to protect them if needed. Mrs. Chen took one look at Eleanor and immediately bustled into action, setting up a second room next to Georgia's and bringing up tea and tissues. She asked no questions, simply offered comfort and practical help, which Georgia appreciated more than she could say. Once Eleanor was settled in her room, resting on the bed with a cold compress on her forehead, Georgia and Preston stepped out into the hallway to talk. "I should go to the sheriff now," Georgia said. "File that report you mentioned." "I'll come with you." They walked to the sheriff's office together, and Georgia told the whole story to Sheriff Davis, a weathered man in his 50s who listened with growing anger. Preston corroborated her account, describing the condition he had found her in and the distance from town. "I'll have a talk with Marcus," Sheriff Davis said grimly. "What he did is criminal, and he'll answer for it. As for Mrs. Eleanor Sullivan, she has every right to leave her husband if she chooses, and he won't be allowed to force her back." The conversation took over an hour, with Georgia having to repeat details and answer questions. By the time they left the sheriff's office, she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Preston walked her back toward the hotel, but paused before they reached it. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What are you going to do now? You were supposed to be heading back to San Francisco." Georgia realized she hadn't thought that far ahead. "I don't know. I can't leave Eleanor right now, not when she's so vulnerable. And honestly, after everything that's happened, I'm not sure San Francisco is where I want to be." "What do you mean?" Georgia struggled to put her feelings into words. "I've been living alone in a city where I barely know anyone, working as a seamstress to make ends meet. It's been lonely and empty, if I'm being honest. Being here with Eleanor, even with all the drama, has reminded me what it's like to have family close by." Preston was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Red Bluff could use a good seamstress. Mrs. Henderson's getting too old to keep up with all the work, and she's been saying she needs help or a replacement. Are you suggesting I stay?" "I'm suggesting you consider it." Preston's eyes met hers, and there was something intense in his gaze. "You have skills people need, you'd be close to your sister, and it's a good town with good people." "And you're here," Georgia thought, but didn't say. The truth was the idea of staying appealed to her more than it probably should. She had known Preston for less than a day, but she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. "I'll think about it," she said softly. "That's all I'm asking." Preston smiled. "Now, you should get back to your sister. She needs you. But Georgia?" He paused, and she realized it was the first time he had used her given name. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? Let me treat you to a real meal, not just hotel food." Georgia's heart skipped. "Are you asking me to court you, Mr. Vance?" "I'm asking if I can get to know you better. See if maybe there's something here worth exploring." His honesty was disarming. "I know the timing might seem strange, given everything that's happened, but I learned a long time ago not to waste time when something feels right." "And this feels right to you?" "From the moment I saw you in that desert, fighting to survive despite everything working against you. Yeah, it felt right." Georgia felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with sunburn. "Then yes, I'd like to have dinner with you tomorrow." Preston's smile was brilliant. "I'll pick you up at 6. He tipped his hat to her and walked away, and Georgia stood there for a moment watching him go and trying to process the tumble of emotions in her chest. Then she turned and went back into the hotel to take care of her sister. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor alternated between crying and sleeping, and Georgia sat with her, holding her hand and reassuring her that she had done the right thing. Mrs. Chen brought up meals and checked on them periodically, her quiet presence a comfort. That evening, as the two sisters sat together in Eleanor's room, Eleanor finally spoke about her marriage. "It wasn't always bad," she said quietly. "When we first married, Marcus was kind, attentive, but over the past year he's changed. He became controlling, critical. He would grab my arm too hard when he was angry, say things designed to hurt me." "Why didn't you tell me?" Georgia asked. I was ashamed. I thought it was my fault somehow that I wasn't being a good enough wife. Eleanor wiped at her tears, and part of me still thought he would change back into the man I married. But when you told me what he did to you, when I realized he was willing to let you die just to punish you, I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. Georgia pulled her sister into an embrace. You're safe now. We'll figure out what to do next together. What about you? Eleanor asked after a while. That cowboy, Preston, the way he looks at you, we barely know each other. Maybe, but sometimes that's all it takes. One moment, one look, and you just know. Eleanor managed a small smile. Thomas was a good man, Georgia, but I never thought he was the right man for you. He was too safe, too predictable. This Preston, he seems different. He is. Georgia thought about Preston's quiet strength, his protective nature, the way he had handled Marcus without resorting to violence but making it clear he would if necessary. He asked me to dinner tomorrow night. You said yes, I hope. I did. Good. Eleanor squeezed her hand. You deserve to be happy, Georgia. You deserve someone who makes your heart race and your knees weak. Someone who looks at you like you're the most precious thing in the world. It's too soon to know if Preston is that person. Maybe. But you'll never know if you don't give it a chance. The next day passed slowly. Georgia helped Eleanor sort through her feelings and start making plans for the future. Sheriff Davis came by to let them know he had spoken to Marcus, who was sullen but had agreed not to bother either of them. The sheriff had strongly suggested Marcus leave town for a while, and he was apparently planning to visit his brother in Oregon. What about the house? Eleanor asked. My name is on the deed too. It's yours as much as his, the sheriff said. You have every right to live there if you want. Or you could sell it and start fresh somewhere else. I don't know what I want yet, Eleanor admitted. Everything is so confusing right now. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, Georgia was a bundle of nerves. She had borrowed another dress from Mrs. Chen, a pretty green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Her sunburn had faded slightly, though her face was still pink, and she had done her best to style her hair in a becoming manner. When Preston knocked on her door, looking handsome in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, Georgia's breath caught in her throat. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself. Preston offered her his arm, and they made their way downstairs and out onto the street. The evening was cooler, a pleasant relief from the heat of the day, and the sky was painted in shades of purple and gold. Where are we going? Georgia asked. There's a small restaurant on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but the food is excellent, and the owner is a friend of mine. I thought it might be nicer than the hotel dining room. The restaurant turned out to be a cozy establishment called Martha's Place, run by a cheerful woman who greeted Preston like family and showed them to a quiet table in the corner. The menu was simple but appealing: roast chicken, beef stew, fresh bread, apple pie. Once they had ordered, Preston leaned back in his chair and studied Georgia with open curiosity. Tell me about yourself. I know the basic facts. You're from San Francisco, you're a widow, you have a sister, but who is Georgia Sawyer? Georgia considered the question. That's harder to answer than you might think. I feel like I've spent the past few years just existing, not really living. I was born in Sacramento, grew up there. My parents died when I was 16, cholera epidemic. Eleanor and I were alone after that. She met Marcus and married him when I was 17, and I married Thomas a year later. Did you love him? The blunt question should have offended her, but somehow it didn't. There was genuine curiosity in Preston's eyes, not judgment. I cared for him. He was good to me. But no, I don't think I was ever truly in love with him. Does that make me a terrible person? Not at all. It makes you honest. Preston reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. What do you want, Georgia? If you could have anything, do anything, what would it be? No one had ever asked her that before. Georgia thought about it seriously. I want to matter to someone. I want to wake up every day with a purpose, feeling like I'm contributing to something larger than myself. I want to feel passion for something: work, a place, a person. I want to feel alive." "And did you feel alive in San Francisco?" "No. I felt like I was waiting for my real life to start." Preston's grip on her hand tightened. "What about now?" Georgia met his eyes, and the intensity there made her dizzy. "Now I feel like maybe I'm finally waking up." Their food arrived, interrupting the moment, but the connection between them remained. They ate and talked, and Georgia found herself opening up to Preston in ways she never had with anyone else. She told him about her dreams of running her own dress shop, about how she loved the feel of fabric beneath her fingers, and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful. He told her about the ranch, about working with horses and cattle, about the freedom of riding across open land under endless sky. "My father wants me to eventually take over the ranch," Preston said. "My older brother Paul was supposed to, but he fell in love with a girl from Denver and moved there to be with her. Now the responsibility falls to me." "Is that what you want?" Preston hesitated. "Yes and no. I love the ranch, love the work, but sometimes I wonder if there's more out there, you know? More to life than the same routine, the same landscape, the same people year after year." "That's how I felt in San Francisco," Georgia said. "Like I was trapped in a life that didn't fit." "Maybe that's what we both need, something new, someone new." The words hung between them, full of possibility. Georgia felt her heart racing, felt the pull of attraction growing stronger with every passing moment. This was different from what she had felt for Thomas. This was fire and electricity. This was standing at the edge of a cliff and wanting to jump. After dinner, Preston walked her back to the hotel slowly, taking the long way through the quiet streets of Red Bluff. The night was cool and clear, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I meant what I said yesterday," Preston said as they walked. "About you staying in Red Bluff. I think you'd be happy here." "I'm starting to think you might be right." "Yeah?" Georgia stopped walking and turned to face him. "Preston, I need to be honest with you. I'm attracted to you, very attracted. But I'm also confused and overwhelmed. 2 days ago, my brother-in-law tried to kill me. My sister just left her husband. My whole life is in upheaval. I'm not sure this is the right time to start something new." Preston nodded slowly. "I understand, and I don't want to pressure you, but Georgia, I need to be honest too. I haven't felt this way about anyone in a long time, maybe ever. I know it's fast, I know the timing is terrible, but I can't deny what I'm feeling." "What are you feeling?" He stepped closer, close enough that Georgia could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. "Like I've been waiting for you. Like finding you in that desert wasn't just luck, it was fate." Georgia's breath caught. "Preston, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow," he said with a slight smile. "I'm just asking for a chance, time to get to know each other properly, time to see if this thing between us is real or just adrenaline and gratitude. And if it is real, then we'll figure it out together." Georgia reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of his jaw. "I'd like that. I'd like the chance to see where this goes." Preston turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm, the gesture so tender it made Georgia's eyes sting with unexpected tears. Then he stepped back, putting proper distance between them again. "I should let you get back to your sister," he said. "But can I see you again tomorrow?" "Yes, please." They stood there for another moment, neither wanting to leave, before Preston finally tipped his hat and walked away. Georgia watched him go, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched her skin. Over the next 2 weeks, Georgia and Preston saw each other nearly every day. He would come into town after finishing his work at the ranch, and they would take walks together, have meals, sit and talk for hours. Georgia learned that he loved to read, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh, that he was gentle with animals and children and fierce in protecting the people he cared about. Eleanor slowly began to heal, both physically and emotionally. The bruises Marcus had left faded, and with them some of the fear that had kept her trapped. She and Georgia talked for long hours about what came next, and eventually Eleanor decided she wanted to keep the house and start over in Red Bluff without Marcus. "I like it here," she told Georgia one afternoon as they sat in the hotel parlor. "I have friends. I know the community. I don't want to let Marcus drive me away from the life I've built." Then you should stay, Georgia said, and I'll stay with you at least for a while, help you get settled. Eleanor smiled. You're staying for me, or are you staying for Preston? Maybe both. He's in love with you, you know. Anyone can see it. Georgia's heart fluttered at the words. Do you really think so? I know so. And I think you're in love with him too, even if you haven't admitted it yet. Was she in love with Preston? Georgia thought about how her day felt incomplete until she saw him, how his smile could brighten her darkest moods, how safe and cherished she felt in his presence. She thought about the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and rare. She thought about his kisses they had shared a few now, sweet and gentle and full of promise. Yes, she admitted quietly. I think I am. That evening, Preston took Georgia to see the Double Creek Ranch for the first time. It was a beautiful spread of land, with rolling pastures and a sturdy ranch house that spoke of prosperity and hard work. Preston's parents welcomed her warmly, and his mother, a kind woman with Preston's eyes, took Georgia aside after dinner. My son is falling for you, she said bluntly. I can see it all over his face. I need to know your intentions are honorable. Georgia appreciated the directness. I care for him very much, Mrs. Vance. More than I thought possible in such a short time. But I'm also trying to be realistic. We've only known each other a few weeks. Sometimes that's all it takes. I knew I would marry Preston's father after 3 days. Mrs. Vance smiled. But I also understand the need to be cautious, especially after what you've been through. Just know that if you hurt my boy, you'll answer to me. I have no intention of hurting him, madam. Good. Then we'll get along just fine. As Preston drove Georgia back to Red Bluff that night in the ranch wagon, he was quieter than usual. What's on your mind? Georgia asked. I've been thinking about the future, about what I want. And what do you want? Preston pulled the wagon to a stop on a rise overlooking the valley. In the moonlight, the landscape was silver and mysterious, beautiful in its wildness. He turned to face Georgia. I want you, he said simply. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life together, have children, grow old on this land we both love. I know it's fast. I know you might think I'm crazy, but Georgia, I am absolutely certain that you're the woman I'm supposed to spend my life with. Georgia's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Preston. I'm not asking you to answer right now, he interrupted. I just needed you to know how I feel. Completely, honestly, without any doubts. I love you, Georgia Sawyer. I think I've loved you since I found you in that desert, fighting so hard to survive. Tears streamed down Georgia's face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. I love you too. I've been so afraid to admit it, afraid it was too soon or too crazy or too much, but I do. I love you. Preston pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that took her breath away. It was nothing like the chaste kisses they had shared before. This was fire and need and promise. This was a claiming and a surrender all at once. Georgia kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her fear and hope and love into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. Marry me. Yes? Yes? Georgia laughed, giddy with happiness. Yes, Preston Vance, I'll marry you. Preston let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, gentler this time, but no less full of love. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Red Bluff. Eleanor stood up with Georgia, looking healthier and happier than she had in months. Preston's whole family came, along with what seemed like half the town. Mrs. Chen had insisted on making Georgia's dress, a beautiful creation of cream silk and lace that made her feel like a princess. As Georgia walked down the aisle toward Preston, seeing the love and wonder in his eyes, she thought about how strange life could be. 2 months ago, she had been alone and adrift, going through the motions of living without really being alive. Then Marcus had tried to kill her, and instead of ending her life, that terrible act had led her to Preston, to love, to a future she had never imagined possible. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, and Georgia took Preston's hands, ready to pledge her life to his. Their wedding night was spent at the ranch, in a room Preston's father had prepared for them. Preston was gentle and patient, understanding that despite her previous marriage, Georgia was nervous. He took his time, worshiping her body with his hands and mouth, whispering words of love and encouragement until Georgia forgot to be nervous and lost herself in sensation and pleasure. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Preston traced lazy patterns on Georgia's bare shoulder. No regrets? Not a single one. Georgia turned her head to kiss him. "You're everything I didn't know I needed." "I could say the same about you." Preston pulled her closer. "I keep thinking about that day I found you. If I had left the ranch an hour later, if I had taken a different route, if I had been in too much of a hurry to stop, but you didn't. You were exactly where you were supposed to be, exactly when you were supposed to be there. You really believe that? That we were meant to find each other?" Georgia thought about everything that had led to this moment, her visit to Eleanor, the argument with Marcus, his cruel decision to abandon her, Preston's timely arrival. Any one thing different, and they might never have met. "Yes, I believe it. We were meant to be together." Over the next few months, Georgia settled into her new life with a sense of peace and joy she had never experienced before. She helped Mrs. Henderson with her seamstress business and eventually took it over when the older woman decided to retire. The shop thrived under Georgia's management, and she found deep satisfaction in creating beautiful clothes for the women of Red Bluff. Eleanor, meanwhile, had officially divorced Marcus and was building her own independent life. She had started teaching at the local school and was courting a kind widower who owned the general store. The two sisters remained close, meeting regularly for tea and long conversations. Marcus had never returned to Red Bluff. Rumor had it he was working in a mining camp somewhere in Nevada, but Georgia tried not to think about him. That chapter of her life was closed, and she had no desire to reopen it. Preston was everything a husband should be: loving, supportive, passionate, kind. He respected her work and encouraged her ambitions. He made her laugh and held her when she cried. He was her partner in every sense of the word, and Georgia fell more in love with him every single day. 1 year after their wedding, Georgia discovered she was pregnant. She told Preston one evening after dinner, watching nervously as he processed the news. Then his face broke into the most brilliant smile she had ever seen, and he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. "We're having a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to be parents." Their son was born in April of 1880, a healthy baby boy with dark hair and his father's eyes. They named him Daniel Thomas Vance, honoring Georgia's late first husband while giving their son his own identity. Preston was a devoted father, constantly holding and playing with Daniel, marveling at every new development. 2 years later, Georgia gave birth to their daughter, Sarah Eleanor Vance, named for both Eleanor and Preston's mother. Sarah had Georgia's dark curls and a fierce temperament that promised she would be a force to be reckoned with. Life on the ranch was good. Preston eventually took over management from his father, who retired to spend more time with his grandchildren. Georgia continued running her dress shop, hiring help so she could balance work and motherhood. The Double Creek Ranch prospered under Preston's leadership, and the Vance family became one of the most respected in the area. Eleanor married her widower, Robert, and they had 2 children of their own. The two families spent holidays and celebrations together, the children growing up as close as siblings. Marcus became a distant memory, a bad dream that had somehow led to beautiful things. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Preston took Georgia back to the spot where he had proposed, the rise overlooking the valley. They left the children with Preston's mother and rode out together, just the two of them, like in the early days of their courtship. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Preston asked, as they stood looking out over the moonlit landscape. "When I asked you what you wanted?" I said I wanted to matter to someone. I wanted to feel alive. And do you? Feel alive? Georgia turned to face her husband. This man who had saved her life in more ways than one. Every single day, you gave me everything I dreamed of and so much more. You did the same for me. Preston pulled her close. I think about that day in the desert sometimes, how close I came to losing you before I ever really had you. It terrifies me. But it didn't happen. We found each other, and we built this beautiful life together. The best life. Preston kissed her softly. I love you, Georgia Vance. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I love you too. Always. They stood there together under the stars, husband and wife, partners and lovers, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Behind them was the ranch, their home, where their children slept safely. Ahead was the future, full of promise and possibility. Georgia thought back to that terrified woman stumbling through the desert, certain she was going to die alone and forgotten. That woman could never have imagined this, the love, the family, the sense of belonging and purpose. Life had taken her to the edge of death, and in that dark moment had given her a reason to truly live. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges, as all lives do. Daniel grew into a strong, capable young man who loved working alongside his father on the ranch. Sarah proved to have her mother's artistic eye and her father's stubborn determination, and at 15 announced her intention to become an architect, which shocked and delighted both parents. Preston's hair began to show threads of silver at the temples, and Georgia noticed the fine lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. But age only seemed to deepen their love, settling it into something comfortable and unshakable. In the summer of 1895, on a particularly warm day, Georgia was working in her dress shop when Preston came in looking serious. Her heart immediately went to their children, but he shook his head before she could ask. Everyone's fine, he said quickly, but I got news from Oregon. Marcus passed away last week, logging accident. Georgia sat down slowly, processing this information. She felt strange, not sad exactly, but unsettled. Does Eleanor know? I sent word to her already. I should go see her. They found Eleanor at her house, calm but pensive. It's odd, she said, as the three of them sat in her parlor. I stopped loving him years ago, stopped thinking about him most of the time, but hearing that he's gone, it feels like closing a book I never quite finished. He was part of your life once, Georgia said gently. It's natural to feel something. I mostly feel grateful, Eleanor admitted. Grateful that I found the courage to leave, that I found Robert, that I've had these happy years. Marcus was an unhappy man, Georgia. I think he was always going to hurt someone. Doesn't excuse what he did. No, but it helps me understand it. Eleanor squeezed her sister's hand. If he hadn't done what he did, you never would have met Preston. I like to think maybe that was Marcus's one contribution to the world, bringing you two together, even if he didn't mean to. It was a generous way to look at it, and Georgia appreciated her sister's ability to find grace even in dark memories. That night, lying in bed with Preston's arms around her, Georgia found herself thinking about fate and choice, about how the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes if we're brave enough to keep moving forward. What are you thinking about, or? Preston murmured sleepily. Just how lucky I am. How lucky we are. I'm the lucky one. I got to save a beautiful woman and convince her to marry me. Georgia smiled in the darkness. You did more than save me, Preston. You showed me what it means to really live, to love with your whole heart, to build something meaningful. We built it together. Preston kissed the top of her head, and we're not done yet. We've got years ahead of us still, God willing. Years to watch our children grow up, maybe become grandparents someday. Years of waking up next to you and falling asleep beside you. That sounds perfect. And it was perfect, or as close to perfect as real life ever gets. The years did continue, bringing grandchildren, 3 from Daniel and his wife, 2 from Sarah and her husband, whom she married after shocking everyone by indeed becoming one of the first female architects in California. The Double Creek Ranch expanded and prospered. Georgia's dress shop became a beloved institution in Red Bluff, eventually passed down to one of her granddaughters who shared her artistic gift. Preston and Georgia grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their share of hardships, crops that failed, cattle lost to disease, the death of Preston's parents, and eventually Eleanor and her husband. But through it all, they had each other, an unshakable partnership built on that foundation of trust and passion forged in the desert heat all those years ago. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a huge party at the ranch. The house was full of laughter and music, of family and friends celebrating a love that had endured. Georgia, now 64 but still beautiful in Preston's eyes, stood with her husband looking out at the gathering. 40 years, she marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you found me in the desert. Other times it feels like we've been together forever. Preston, at 66, still tall and strong despite his age, pulled her close. Best 40 years of my life. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the part where my brother-in-law tried to kill me? Especially that part, because it brought you to me. Preston turned her to face him, cupping her face in his weathered hands. You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. You're still the only woman I've ever truly loved. And if I had to live my life over again, I wouldn't change a single thing as long as it meant I still got to spend it with you. Tears filled Georgia's eyes, happy tears, grateful tears. I love you. Preston Vance. Thank you for finding me that day. Thank you for loving me all these years. Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a cowboy who fell in love too fast and too hard. They kissed there in front of everyone to the cheers and applause of their family, and Georgia thought about that desperate, frightened woman in the desert, about the miracle of Preston appearing on the horizon, about every choice and chance that had led to this moment surrounded by love and family and the life they had built together. She had wanted to feel alive, to matter to someone, to experience real passion and purpose. Preston had given her all of that and more. He had given her a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, a future bright with possibility. As the party continued around them, Georgia and Preston slipped away to their favorite spot, the rise overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, and the land stretched out before them, beautiful and wild and theirs. Do you remember what you told me that first night I brought you here? Preston asked. When I told you I loved you? I said I loved you too. Before that, when I asked what you wanted. Georgia smiled, remembering. I wanted to wake up every morning with purpose. I wanted to feel like I was contributing to something larger than myself. I wanted passion. And did you get it? Everything you wanted? Georgia looked at her husband, at the land they had built their life on, thought about their children and grandchildren inside the house, about the community they had helped shape, and the love they had nurtured for 4 decades. I got so much more than I ever dreamed possible. I got a real life, Preston. A beautiful, messy, joyful, meaningful life, and I got to live it all with you. Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her the way he had on countless nights before. Then we did something right. We did everything right. They stood there, as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful from the ashes of near tragedy. Their story had started with abandonment and cruelty, with death lurking in the desert heat, but it had transformed into something magical, a testament to the power of love, the importance of second chances, and the way the right person can change everything. Georgia had been saved that day in the desert, rescued by a cowboy with kind eyes and a gentle heart. But over the years, she had come to understand that Preston had been saved too. They had saved each other. Two lonely souls finding exactly what they needed exactly when they needed it most. The desert wind blew softly across the valley, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of tomorrow. And Georgia and Preston stood together, husband and wife, partners and lovers, their story complete, their love eternal, their life together a triumph over everything that had tried to break them. This was their happily ever after, hard-won and deeply cherished. And as Preston led Georgia back toward the house, toward their family and the celebration waiting inside, neither of them looked back. There was only forward now, only the future they would continue to build together for whatever time they had left. The lights from the ranch house spilled out into the gathering dusk, warm and welcoming, and Georgia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home, not the place, but the person. Preston was her home, and she was his. And together they had created something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love, of family, of two people who had refused to let circumstance defeat them. The story that had begun in desperation and fear had ended in joy and fulfillment. The woman who had been left to die in the desert had instead found life, real life, abundant life, and the cowboy who had saved her had found his own salvation in her love. It was, Georgia thought, as they walked through the door to be enveloped by the warmth of family and celebration, the perfect ending, the only ending that mattered. Together, always together, until the very end.